So I know Taigong is really cool and all, and he's also a very strong unit, but I know the real reason a lot of you guys are going in on this banner, and that's because Nikki's going to be on it. Not only is she a Blue Eyes White Dragon reference, but she's also just really adorable, both from a design standpoint and from the story standpoint as well. So I understand a lot of people are probably going to go hard on this banner, wanting to get as many copies of her as possible, which is why I'm glad I get to kind of sing her praises a little bit in this video. Now, I do just kind of want to make something very clear. In one of the gameplays, I'm showing her fighting dragons. The other one, I'm kind of just messing around. We do end up actually losing that fight, but I thought the sequence of events were really funny, and I think it demonstrates her going up against dragon enemies, and then it shows her going up against non-dragon enemies and kind of how she'll perform in that way. Also, keep in mind on JP, I don't have Koyanskaya, I don't have Oberon, so I can't like really gas her up and make her do crazy damage, but I still think she's a very fun servant to use regardless. Now, if you're wanting to use her as a buster farmer, I have some bad news. She does only have a 20% battery, but you gotta open up your third eye and consider the possibilities of using an AoE servant in some weird janky challenge quest, or maybe even using her in some of the raids, as she is going to get a power mod from the actual event itself. So if you happen to get a bunch of copies of her, she actually might go Hamtaro against some of those raids. And I also just find her to be a very fun servant to use in general, as all of her effects are fairly strong. It's just you're going to have a lot of people that are going to complain and whine saying, well, she doesn't at least have a 30% battery, so she can't farm and blah, blah, blah. Look, I understand that farming is like 95% of NA content, but over on JP, we have stuff like advanced quests, we have the weird ordeal call quest, we have challenge quests. You know, we're starting to get more of these weird, janky fights where units like Nikki can start to shine a little bit more. So I will say you might get to use her in more quests as time goes on. And again, her being anti-dragon is just going to be good in general. I mean, how many enemies in the game are dragon? A lot of servants and a lot of random enemies. But before we begin, if you've not already, make sure you leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel for that daily FGO content, and let's start diving into this, starting off with Nikki's hits, where she's rocking a very strong double buster, double arts deck. I love seeing that on my buster servants, because having those double arts cards can also help them refund their NP. Unfortunately, in my times using Nikki, I really did wish that they maybe gave her like NP over time or a larger battery, not for farming, but even that 0.86% NP gain with the 2-hit arts cards don't really seem to be refunding quite enough whenever I do use her. That does tend to be a little bit of a problem for me. But I'm also very spoiled because, as you guys know, I am the biggest art simp on the planet. I love doing art setups. I think it's very fun. I've loved doing that since year one, when we had stuff like the Waiver Vlad Tamamo setup. I thought those things were really cool and were very fun to do, so maybe I'm just a little spoiled with my arts units. She doesn't really have any notable passives to speak of. I mean, she has a pretty solid Writing EX buff that's going to give her 12% quick performance, which I guess is kind of nice, but she only have the one. And she does have Magic Resistance A, meaning that 1 in 5 buffs are pretty much going to get whiffed if they're a normal buff and they're not debuffing you and you're like debuff success rate and stuff along those lines. But really, there's not a whole lot that's really going on with the hits and the passive skills. A lot of the power is going to be concentrated in her skills, starting off with the first skill. And this is something that I love, love, love to see on my CQ weird, janky oriented servants that are trying to go after more of those more difficult nodes, or to be good in just most scenarios, because this is going to cover a lot of the basics for her as a buster unit in some of these weird nodes, because she's going to give herself a pretty decent guts 3k that lasts for 3 turns. That's already really good. That's survivability that, again, Koyanskaya nor Merlin provide, so no matter whoever you're using, she is getting something out of having the guts to just be able to face tank some attacks. Then she's going to give herself debuff immunity for 1 time for 3 turns. I wish it was just a flat 3-turn debuff immunity, but it's nice. You can kind of plan this around, say, a boss's break bar, or if they have, say, like a timing on attack thing. You can kind of also use this to prepare yourself for that, and with any random stuns, charms, or big attack buffs that are going to come your way, it's just nice. And then she's also setting herself up for success as a buster unit by giving herself 10 stars every turn to kind of always ensure she's got crits that she's able to do, because I do think Nikki's crits, because she's paired with Koyanskaya and people like Merlin, will always look pretty good. And it's just a general good blanket skill that's going to cover her in all of her ways, right? It gives her survivability, a way to kind of interact with weird boss mechanics, and then it also provides extra stars in combination with, say, the 2030s your supports might have, or if you're using Merlin in combination with his NP, it's just very strong. Then you move into her second skill. This is again another very strong skill. It's very straightforward, but it is very solid. It's giving her a 30% arts and buster buff for 3 turns, and is giving herself a 50% dragon power mod for 3 turns on a 6-turn cooldown, which again is very solid. The arts buff does kind of help shore up that problem I was having with the arts cards not feeling as strong as they probably should be. It's going to be very strong when you have that second skill up, because that arts buff is going to function as kind of like an NP gain buff to your arts cards. And then if you're worried about a 30% buster buff, well, have no fear. She will, spoiler alert, give herself extra buster on her NP to functionally make it that every time she fires an NP while the second skill is up, she has a mana burst, which is strong. And then, like I said at the beginning, she's anti-dragon, which is always going to be a good thing. And even if you think 50% is not good enough by itself, you go to the third skill where she gives the entire party an additional 30% power mod against dragons, so she's getting 80% total, and everybody else is benefiting a bit and being able to help in taking down those enemies. I do like the idea that, you know, most dragons are like riders and stuff like that, if you think about the mob enemies. And so you could bring your Merlin and you can almost kind of fight back against the dragons, because he's going to give himself his own charisma, plus he's going to get a power mod. He might do a little bit of damage against them. It's also kind of nice for, say, Koyenskaya, because in that inverse scenario where she's an assassin and most of them are riders, she's really going to lay the smackdown on them, and her NP might actually do some pretty decent damage against them. So I do think that's kind of a funny interaction that you could have with your supports. But then she's also going to increase the party's critical damage by 30% for 3 turns. Not the craziest, it's not the most insane, but 30% can give you some pretty good numbers from time to time. Keep in mind that Morgan's third skill is also 30%. So you can see some pretty nasty crits with her. And then there's the aforementioned 20% battery. Do I wish this was at least 30%? Yes, because then I think Nikki would get a lot more love and people would start to use her a lot more, because unfortunately, if you're an AoE, and even sometimes now as a single target, if you can't really be used as a farmer in just normal nodes, or even, you know, let alone 90++ nodes, again, for some of your single targets that can loop their batteries, if you can't do that at baseline, you lose a lot of value in the eyes of a lot of players. And I do wish she got that extra 10%, but, you know, fingers crossed that maybe they buff one of her other skills, give her, say, just a 10% battery for herself even, because that would give her that 30 she needs to at least be buster looping compliant, and so that would be very, very nice. Because even when you start looking at her NP, it has more good effects. She pierces defense, which is always very good in those annoying boss fights where you just have a boss that's like, you know what, screw it, 50% defense for the rest of the battle. This just completely gets around that, and it's very nice to have something like this, although Pierce Invul is always going to be better. As invincibility and dodge, I will just say, is way more common than bosses that are massively stacking their defense, but it is nice when it comes up. The burn is okay, I suppose. It's one of those random things that, you know, if we don't have a way to really take advantage of it, there's really no point in her having burn. But thankfully, Honey Lake does exist, so if you do want to take advantage of that and give her an extra power mod, you could slap a Honey Lake on your Dobra, and that would allow her to get power mod against people that she has burned. So that's something. But then at that point, you would just use Yang, I suppose, if you also had her. But, you know, again, not everybody has Yang, and so you could use Dobra with that. That's interesting, I suppose. And then she's also going to lower their defense by 20% for 3 turns. So in theory, each NP that you fire is going to do more and more damage. And I do like units like that in CQs. And then on the overcharge, obviously there's the buster buff that she's giving herself, 20% for 1 turn procs first. So in combination with the second skill, she does have a 50% mana burst. Overall, not a bad unit at all, but as you can kind of see, sometimes she can be a little bit wonky when she's not going up against dragon enemies. I have experienced, and I did a couple of testing videos before I actually decided on the ones that I wanted to use, and I did want to use the one with the King Protea one, because I think too many people will show you gameplay of, oh, this unit like 3-turned this boss, or this unit was able to live for 99 turns or something. But a lot of that does take a lot of resetting, and it's not, you know, normal that you're going to just be able to do that every single time consistently unless the unit's really, really good. And so after getting the comment on my Melusine video where I was talking about how she did a bunch of looping against the King Protea, but ultimately lost. I got a comment about that, and they were like, well, actually, no, it was still very impressive that they were able to outlast King Protea for that long and still nearly beat them. And I think that's kind of interesting because the Nikki that I'm using right now should be showing as the second gameplay video. She does get very far. Obviously, she's not doing a solo. She has supports because I do feel that her as an AoE does need a little bit more help to kill a 1 million HP boss that's not a dragon, but she did still make it quite far, you know? And I do think that's telling that there is a semblance of a very strong unit in there. It's just, you're going to have to bring her against dragons or at least casters to see that power, because bringing her neutral against people that she doesn't have a power mod against and she's not super effective against can be a little bit rough, which I know is like, hey, ZTL, duh. Yeah, if you bring a unit neutral where they don't really have anything going for them, they're going to struggle a little bit. And I guess that even showed with Melusine, but at least for Melusine, she did it as a solo, and I know I'm comparing like an S tier unit to what I consider to be a B tier unit, but still, I do want to incorporate that in some of these servant reviews as I kind of go over them to kind of show that even if they did lose the fight, they still did very well. And I did think she did very well against the King Protea. Again, not a very optimal setup. I don't have all the buster supports over on JP, and I still think this is a very strong showing from Nikki. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. Again, I kind of just said it earlier, I do have her ranked as a B tier unit, just a very solid, strong option, but you're really going to need to bring her to stuff where she at least has some kind of advantage, because she's not so good that you could just bring her in there and her natural kit is going to carry her to the finish line. But there is good stuff in there. She can do some decent damage. She provides stars for herself. She has her own crit damage. The battery is nice, even if it is small. Being able to stack the defense down is very effective as well. I do think there are good things in there. Now that we have stuff like Honey Lake, servants getting random burn on their kit can just be made as a power bond, right? It's just very good for stuff like that. And even with the Jacques one, the same thing goes for curses. But again, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Leave a like on the video, subscribe, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace, late guys.